We're talking about how to select a camp spot. And we're going to talk about some of the best practices, as well as some things to think about when you're operating in your campground as well. So let's go into this forest here and see if we can find a good spot. I'm going to introduce this concept of the wise campers. All right, each of those letters stands for something. The first one is wind, and that is a huge consideration when you're looking at a place to camp. First of all, you want to make sure that you're not going to be directly in the wind. Usually on a hilltop, that can be one of the worst places where wind is just going to make your life miserable. When you're planning out your route, and you're looking for a place to camp, you can even look on a map and kind of make those determinations. The other thing that you can do in your planning process is understand where the prevailing wind is coming from, right? So if it's coming from the southwest, then you need to think about how you're going to set up your structure or find natural wind breaks. Basically, you're going to put those breaks in between you and the wind. All right, so if you set up a tarp shelter, you might set it up to where it's angled like this. You're here, and the wind is coming from this direction. All right. All right, so the next letter in wise campers is I. The I stands for impact. And there's something not only sort of ethical about looking after our impact on the land, but that can also be a strategic decision. Not leaving evidence that you were in an area so that you can be tracked is important. So those are the kinds of things to think about, thinking about leaving no trace of your presence behind. That means packing out what you packed in, removing all trace of a fire if you have one. Sometimes it's better not to even have a fire for that reason. And if you leave a footprint where you slept, then trying to cover that with debris and just restoring it back to the way you found it. Same thing with dealing with refuse and those sorts of things. So I don't want to linger too long on impact, but it's an important part of our planning and our strategic operation in the field. This might come up in multiple categories, but safety is the S in wise campers. I just noticed right here there was some scat, probably from a coyote. Watching out for wildlife is very important. Doing your recon when you're in an area, seeing what kind of wildlife might be in the area, looking at scat and footprints and things like that to know what potential encounters that you might have or that you want to avoid. As I was walking through here, something jumped up and ran away. It could have been a grouse or a coyote or a raccoon, I don't know. But when you're out operating in the field, that's one of the threats. It's not something to be super afraid of, but what we want to do is, again, avoid impact by not having deadly confrontations with animals. Deterrence is the best approach to that. We'll talk about that some more. I have bear spray on me. That's kind of a last resort, but it definitely could come in handy without having to, really harm an animal. Other things to look out for with safety are things like cliffs that might be near your camp that you might not see in the dark, especially. So it's important to scout out the area that you're going to camp in, to look for dangerous features in the landscape. Inspect the soil in your campground for stability. If there's debris or signs of unstable soil, that might be a sign that it's a potential flooding area. So it's best, not only for safety but for impact, to have solid ground to set up your camp. One of the 4 W's they talk about is the widowmaker, and that means reconning the area above you for either dead trees or dead branches that might fall on you if the winds pick up or whatever that might be. Weather awareness, and that is, being aware of what to expect with the weather and what the possibilities are, because things can change in certain environments very quickly. So being prepared for rain or storms, things like that. All right. I think I see a spot up here that looks good for a potential site. Let's go check that out. So this looks like an interesting and appealing area. Is open here and flat, as opposed to the surrounding landscape, which is very dense. So it might be worth considering staying here, but some of the things to keep in mind is that it is exposed. Probably not to worry about lightning because of all the trees. There's no single standing tree. We're surrounded by natural windbreaks. Just wanted to be careful about being spotted here because it's kind of in the open. So if there's something off of this part right here that is still flat that you could kind of hide in, that would probably be better if you're trying not to be detected. I mean, for just a friendly outing today, and if I wanted to camp here, it would be just fine. Although the other thing to consider is the animals. This is just off of a trail, and a trail is a lot more likely to be traveled by animals. So that's something to think about. This is a dead end, so maybe that's not so much to worry about. Some safety procedures would be to set up noisemakers around your camp, set up a perimeter, look for the places where animals might come in, and definitely follow your Bermuda Triangle principles, meaning keeping your food and your washing station 100 yards away from where you're sleeping. Also, trying to be upwind from where you cooked and cleaned, so that the smell isn't traveling from the food through you. Those are things to consider. Let's go take a look around here. That kind of looks like a lockbox, maybe for food. So people would camp here and then they would lock up the food, like a bear box, essentially. So that's a sign, but that's pretty old. It doesn't look like it's been used in a long time. So I don't know that there's any bears in this area, but it's always possible. So the E is for elevation, and the principle there is that um, you want to be down in a depression. Where we are right now is on top of a hill. There's a little bit of elevation that way, so we're not on like a ridge line, and that's the prevailing wind that way too. So that's a natural barrier for us, which is good. See, basically what happens is, hot air rises and the cold air settles down in those valleys. So you don't want to be down in a valley. You don't necessarily want to be up on the top of a hill or on a ridge because lightning and wind. So those are things to think about. Where we are right here, there's a lot of cover. We have the high ground here. We can see down over this way. There is water down there. That's one of the 4 W's: wind, water, wildlife, and widowmakers. This is an area that can be flooded, and it has a vantage point in many directions here. Almost 75% of it is a vantage point, which is great strategically speaking. The only thing I would say about this spot is that in this immediate vicinity, it's clear. It's not a bit of huge area, but it doesn't provide cover in terms of camouflage or that kind of thing. So if that was a concern, then areas adjacent to this opening would probably be a better strategic choice. But other than that, I do see some deer track, but a little sign of other wildlife. You might scope out the area. Some people do some reconnaissance and kind of inspect for those kinds of things just to be sure. But I think this would be overall a pretty good spot. And going over the other elements of wise campers, just some things to think about real quick. I don't want to belabor the point too much, but be ready for rain. be ready for storms, and have an emergency plan. Have communications in place for how you're going to communicate with your fellow campers, and what's your escape route, and potentially an alternative escape route to vacate the area or to get someone to the nearest medical help. So knowing where the nearest medical help is important too. So those are things to broadly consider while you're camping in a place like this. So that's it for this video. Soon we'll be talking about navigation and setting up shelter, some of the basic stuff that a scout needs to know. So stay tuned for the future videos. Subscribe, like. Thanks for watching.